He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Tukua, 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 tukua hi.
This episode, Te Matatini, the Māori Kapa Haka Olympics, 55 teams with one supreme winner. Tukua was at the finals day with the top 12 rōpū.
The overarching theme for our bracket was Paua Te Aroha. So we wanted to take the love that we felt at Koro Bomb's tangi from the motu, and we wanted to go and share that with everybody.
Nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to Tukua, an intergenerational arts podcast presented by 75-year-old arts activist and academic Ngahuia Te Awekotuku.
Part of our very being is this need to show off. I think Māori are the original show-offs.
Gen X sculptor Brett Graham.
I mean, that's the most miharal thing for me, is to see how hungry this current generation are for their taha Māori.
And 24-year-old stand-up comedian Kura Turuwhenua.
I bought a boil-up pie. Never had a boil-up pie before, but I rate it.
Each episode, one of us chooses an arts event and makes the others come too. So what could possibly go wrong? Oh, and then there's me, Catherine Graham, the producer. I get to keep them all in line. So, Ngahuia, this is one of your choices for the podcast. Tell me, why did you decide to choose Te Matatini?
Tēnā koe, Catherine. Why did I choose Te Matatini? Because kapa haka, cultural performance, the theatre of our lives, what we see on stage, is a recording and a celebration of who we are. But most importantly of all, to me, it's a creative and contemporary expression of how our people feel and how we rage and how we question and how we celebrate. I think way back to the 80s when Space Invaders and the on-screen games were supposedly tainting our children's minds, and either manutaki or waihirere or maybe Wakahuia, one of those big groups, did this incredible haka about Space Invaders. I think it was manutaki, and it brought the play style, and it was so contemporary. And that's 40 years ago, over 30 years ago. And since then we've seen the strong evolution of style, of costume, of ways of addressing issues. But more importantly, as a people, we are musicians, we are dancers. We express ourselves creatively through our bodies.
And then I asked Kura about her very first matatini.
It's so cool. I didn't know what to expect. I felt like when I was on the way here this morning, I knew that once I got here it was going to be cool and I was going to be like, oh, that's so awesome. But to actually like walk in and just immediately like see the street is just full of cars like parked up on the grass, and like seeing hundreds of Māori just everywhere you go, and also non-Māori around, and everyone is just happy and having a good kai and enjoying the kapaka, and it's like a magical feeling, honestly, just to be surrounded by Māori in their element. And you know, like I grew up doing kapaka, but I wouldn't say I'm a kapaka person. Like it's one thing to do it and it's another thing to really be in that world. So to be here right now, I feel like I'm just getting like a little glimpse into this massive world of kapa haka that's been going for, you know, way longer than I was even an idea. Yeah, it's amazing.
And have you had a chance to watch much kapa haka yet?
I've watched about 4 groups so far. I wish that I was able to watch it during the week because they've been live streaming the whole festival, but it just didn't work out that way. So I really have just like showed up, and this is my first real like glimpse into Te Matatini this year, and the groups have been amazing so far. I honestly think that the food stores was the first place that I went. I went to drop off my bags to go and sit with our little group, know where we're sitting, and then after that I was straight up and going to see what's up on the kai tables and seen some hangi pies. I bought a boil-up pie. Never had a boil-up pie before, but I rate it. I reckon I'd eat it again. It was crack up because I also got otai. Otai is not even Māori, it's Tongan. It cracked me up. It was yum ass. It was exactly what I wanted.
And Brett, how's your Te Matatini going?
The last Matatini that I went to was 20 years ago. We're clearly not a kapa haka family, but it's been extraordinary. I mean, that's the most miharo thing for me, is to see how hungry this current generation are for their taha Māori. And so a lot of those moko weren't just painted on, they were real moko. And a lot of the reo it's real because it's not how it was in the past, right, learning. You can tell that most of these people come from places, where reo is it's their first reo. So it's a hell of a difference, and to feel that hunger that people have for the culture. And also, that those groups, how competitive it is just to get in, how they cull so many people from each group. So what you see there is the cream of the cream, which is phenomenal. And I mean, my question for visual arts and the other forms of arts, do we have that same degree of criticality with our other art forms? If you're flat in the kapa haka group, you're out, and they don't mess around, you're out. That's why I wouldn't stand a chance. But do we have the same criticality with our other art forms, with our visual arts? I mean, we should do, but we don't, do we?
We have now come to the moment we've all been waiting for.
O te toa whakaihu waka, o te Kahui Maunga, o te Kahui Tipua, o te Kahui Wairua, te kapa haka o Ngati Whakaue.
I spoke to Kereama Wright, a senior member of Ngati Whakaue. He was in Rarotonga, celebrating his win.
Tēnā tātou te iwi o tira e te whānau e whakarongo mai ana. Ko Kereama Wright tōku ingoa, he uria hau no Te Arawa, o tira no Taranaki Maunga no hoki, I pake kia hau I Rotorua, nā koau tētahi o ngā kaiāwhina I te kapa haka o Ngati Whakaue. This festival in Taranaki was my 8th.
Why do you do it?
I mean, I've been asked this question a number of times, and usually my answer is, those who don't understand would think we're crazy. We spend literally hundreds of voluntary hours learning our repertoire, learning our words, creating material, composing songs, researching connections to different iwi, to different regions. And the only answer that I can give is that because we're passionate about our culture and our people and inspiring our tamariki. And so, although some might think you're spending all this time for 20 minutes on the stage, well, actually, the most enjoyable part of it is the journey, is the connection that we build in the community, that we build with not only our own whānau, our siblings and our cousins, but the wider iwi. And also being able to take our children to kapa haka practice and they see, their own heroes at kapa haka practice in action. And that's beside the transmission of knowledge and the transmission of the Māori language and the passing down of histories and stories. And I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a competitive element to it as well. Growing up in Te Arawa, we have been entertaining the world for more than 200 years with our culture. We've been accommodating and expressing manaakitanga for over 200 years. And so it's in our blood, really. And some would say we don't have a choice as Te Arawa because we grow up living and breathing kapa haka.
Can you explain what winning means at Te Matatini?
It's about the pride, I guess, of being part of, or your iwi winning the nationals. And I mean, there's, bragging rights, and that's from the competitive side of things. As you can say you are the national champion, you're the best kapa haka in the world, and we currently hold the Premier Ngāpuawihi Duncan McIntyre Trophy, which is today being taken to its third kura within Te Arawa. because all of Te Arawa is proud. And the thing is, yeah, it's not just the Ngati Whakaue win. It's a Te Arawa win. It's a win for Te Arawa.
A few weeks later, the Tukua team sat down to rehash the highs and lows of Te Matatini. Of course, the Ngati Whakaue amongst us could not have been happier. Ngahuia, have you recovered from your winning frenzy of celebratory drinking and carrying on?
I don't drink.
I know.
We're still very happy and slightly disbelieving and extremely sad for the Kroa, which is why I'm wearing my poppy. Ngā mihi ki a tātou, kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
My Te Matatini experiences at Te Kahui Maunga, still buzzing, still reeling, a whio tonu te mahunga, pāreka tonu te ngākau, glorious, and not just the performances, but the manaakitanga, the love, support, warmth, brilliance of the local people and how they took care of us. The facilities that we arrived at, or rather thought about with grave doubt, because one thinks of WOMAD and opera and weird Pākehā performative rituals. And the lake, that little duck pond that was full of Canada geese during the actual Matatini, how were we going to put the huge maihi and carvings across that? How were we going to keep the kids out of the water? But no, it was an extraordinary experience. And as a veteran of these magical times since the early 1970s, and previous to that, the Hui Tōpu circuit, I was impressed. It was great. It was great. It was brilliant. Ngā mihi kawana ki a te atiawa ki a Taranaki Maunga. It was amazing.
And Brett, you were saying that the last time you were at Te Matatini was 20 years ago, was it?
Thanks for that plug, sis. The last time was in Auckland. Engari, tuatai te mihi hei tautoku i a koe me tō whakaro. Kia tuku atu ngā mihi ki a Taranaki ki Te Atiawa, Taranaki whānui. Wonderful hosts, wonderful to be in Taranaki. The main thing is you get a glimpse into te ao Māori if we had not been colonised. So that was a theme of a lot of the groups. Tu Manako, for example, saying, or following the cue of kiingi tuheitia, kia Māori ai, tō ao, Māori, kia Māori, kia Māori, kia Māori. The atmosphere, the way people embrace and tautoko their own rōpū from everywhere else, that genuine spirit of manaaki that pervades everything is sort of a taste of what this place might have been like if we hadn't been colonised. What's amazing is to see the new current generation on stage and to see how so many of the people on stage were actually moko. So many of the generation actually spoke te reo as a first language and live and breathe te taha Māori. So that's just so much in evidence.
And Kura, your very first Te Matatini, how was it for you?
Yeah, it was amazing. I had never been to Te Matatini before, so before this day, I was, he waiwai tapu ki Te Matatini, he waiwai tapu ki Taranaki anō hoki. I'd never been to Taranaki either, so it was a pretty amazing first experience of the place, and the Maunga was out to say, hi everyone, please don't litter. But I just remember feeling a really good mauri and a great energy about the place. It was very calm. Like I thought that it might have a sort of hectic, there's going to be so many people, there's so many groups, it's a competition. Sometimes it's kind of like a tense energy, but it was just incredibly tau and quite laid back, lots of whānau, lots of kai, everybody having a look at the Māori stalls, which was super cool to me. I didn't buy anything. Sorry, I laughed before, Brett, at what you said. Not because I was laughing at what you said. I was laughing at Ngahuia's face and shocked reaction to you saying that it was kind of like a image of what we could have looked like if we weren't colonised, which I think is such a interesting thing to say, because I would find myself disagreeing with that, but I don't know if we're going to go into that stuff
Go
yet,
for it, girl. Go for it.
Oh, okay. I guess it's just interesting because, Matatini, it's definitely a platform where we can see, to me, I see it as like visions or predictions of what we might have been or what we could have been. But I think with groups like Mōtai Tangata Rau, they're quite explicitly honest about our position as a colonised people, all the way from their costumes to wartime type melodies and tunes that they were using in their performance there. But I do think that them as a group, they're quite, that is their intention, is to be quite controversial, to be quite brutally honest and say, well, our colonisation is a part of who we are now, isn't it? It's kind of what the reality is.
So, I mean, that's a good point to raise in regards to Matatini, just how much, of course, has recognised the fact that we've been colonised.
I want to get away from the C word. No, I do.
Christian?
I do.
Christian? No.
No.
But can I just jump in, and I might be completely on the wrong track, but isn't the whole kapa haka itself is not a traditional...
It is.
Is it?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes.
Talk about that then.
As a descendant of the Te Awekotuku, one of the reasons... Don't you do that. One of the reasons that we left Hawaii, wherever that may have been, is because, blah-de-blah-de-blah, Tamate Kapua was hanging suspended, being punished in the rafters of the whare tāpere of Toi Te Huatahi. And he was choking on the fumes from their fire, and he was really disgusted by the performances of the people below him celebrating his demise, and he kept jeering at them and saying, "You people can't haka, I can haka." And his brother Whakatūria, who was fabulous, stumbled along on the rooftop coming to rescue the sibling and said, "Tell them you're useless, get down there on the ground and dance." And he did. And they got away because the beauty and the strength and the athletic grace and the originality of those two Te Arawa men on that occasion wiped out the people of Toi Te Huatahi. And that is over 1,000 years ago. Now, that's just one example. There are others throughout the Māori world. Another example...
Well, I love that story because, of that famous line that when they prompted him, kept on prompting him, and he said that the smoke from your tortuous fire won't kill me, but your dreary hakas will.
Yes, exactly.
The original
and so there is that competition. And then you've got wonderful stories about whatihua and tūrongo from the other hull of the double canoe. From
Sounds
Tane.
dangerous.
Yes, but how they competed. And I think that part of our energy, part of our very being, is this need to demonstrate excellence, to show off. I think Māori are the original show-offs. We think of a world before the C word, where Māori were loving and gentle, and there was a spirit of manaakitanga that pervaded the universe. Hey, get real, we were cannibals. We were. There are ancient,
C word.
beautiful... Another C word. Another C word.
There's a lot of C
There's a lot of C words. But, and I don't mean water, the notion that everything was tau and ngāwari and Maunga rongo ki te whenua ti rūtida. He rukahu tērā ki oku whakaaro. We were a warrior people. We were, and we still are, except our battlefields are sport and haka, and possibly intellectual and creative prowess and rigour as well. However, in the shadow of Maunga Taranaki, we did see that gentle, flowing, easy, creative glory. And yet the irony, most brutally of all, is that we were beneath the shadow of a mountain that had been plundered and brutalised. Absolutely. And so their resilience and their gentleness is absolutely inspirational.
So, Wharehoka wano taku ingoa, ko au te māngai o ngā iwi o te Kahui Maunga. So our role as iwi was to support the Kahui Maunga Kapahaka Society because they were really hosting this event. Whoever is hosting will set the kawa. And of course within Te Kahui Maunga we had to have that discussion because essentially the location, we're in Ngati Whakaue Apu, we're in Te Awa Iwi, we're in Tokomaru Waka. And so we have to, ensure that the integrity of this local kawa is maintained as well as acknowledging the wider Te Kahui Maunga Confederation of Tribes and protocols. But essentially, when it came down to it, the kawa, in terms of how the pōhiri played out, was, it had to be true to the location.
And how do you think the pōwhiri went?
We had time to discuss what the narrative was, and it talked about the origins of Te Kahui Maunga in terms of Takuaharangi, the waka that, and right back to Maui, Tiki Ataranga and the brothers and all of that sort of, and our view of that story and the creation of the, not just Taranaki Maunga, but all of the Maunga within our rohe, Ruapehu Maunga, right through down the Awa. So we had to combine that, but there was that he Kahui Wairua was really acknowledging the impact that the spiritual prophets of our region had upon us in real difficult times. Te whiti o rongo mai, tohu kākahi, of course, with the parihaka Maunga rongo stance they displayed when our land was confiscated and our people were forced off the land and forced into this place that became parihaka, and the way that their role in terms of uplifting us at a time of huge stress. Tahu Pōtiki Wiramu Rātana, the early part of last century when our people were living through the ravages of all of that confiscation, he came up and helped in a spiritual sense in terms of our people. How did that apply to us today? And so you saw the presentation of a pōhiri that was based around our poi, rather than haka pōhiri, if you like, or rākau, just about rākau. We had our rākau there, of course, but the presence was really, because we have a kōrero taku poia manu, taku ringa he manu, it was the prophets. The poi was a messenger of Poropiti, our prophets, to voice their uplifting words upon our people. And so we applied all that. And so we took ourselves into the domain of rongo. While the pōhiri was at our main rugby field, Yarrow Stadium there in New Plymouth, the traditional name Maratahu Huakai, it was a garden, it was a kai place. We were in the domain of rongo. And so we were bringing people into that space rather than just being about two matauinga. And we wanted that presence and that feel to permeate right across the event.
Well, it's interesting that Whare emphasised rongo. This is a place of rongo. Because, of course, it's not deemed a place of rongo, the pōwhiri situation. Usually, it's a place of tūmatauinga. But in light of what had gone down with the previous pōwhiri in Auckland, I'm sure that he wanted to emphasise that. But even though there was a lot of tension at the previous pōwhiri in Tāmaki, I think that was a good thing in terms of it. A lot of Māori were talking about that the pōwhiri and these rituals are not to be taken lightly. They're not things to dismiss, but they have a purpose. And it's a place that you air not just the good things, but also those things on the marae, those tensions, so that they're not just platitudes.
Well, I think a lot of people were, after the last pōwhiri, there was definitely, there had been a lot of talk about, I wonder what might happen this time in terms of, so it was clearly that was on their minds. Shall we talk about our personal favourites from the competition? Kura.
It was like quite hardcore to try and pick a favourite when I was like trying to figure out who and where everyone was coming from, but then afterwards I went back and watched the performances again because they had been recorded, which was great. And I found myself really, I think that's why I started talking about them. I found myself really loving Motai Tangata Rau because it was so dramatic, theatrical, quite, I don't know what the word is that I want to use. I don't want to say controversial, but just like a quite radical take on what kapa haka can be. And I really, really love that.
Ngahuia, you're pulling faces. What's that about?
Oh, God. No, well, kei te whakaue hau, tautoko kōrero. I actually thought they were disturbing, haunted, peculiar, eerie, militaristic, yet confrontational. The use of the tin whistle, that shrieking, ugly sound that would gather the troops or alert them on the colonial battlefield on the white side. Appropriating that was really clever. The costuming, their chief had 2 costume changes during the performance, which was really noticeable.
And then one in the prize giving too.
Yes, and that one as well. And then the actual choreography was evocative of Pai Māori their ho-ho rituals from that time, which really distressed a number of people watching and listening. It was a masterful reconfiguration of a time of loss and grief and ugliness. And actually, though, and I want to say this, and why I was pulling faces, which I'm often accused of, there was another extraordinary group that dealt with the same issues, the same agonies, the same survival strategies, and that was ngā pura o te tai hauauru. And they were glorious, and I was profoundly disappointed that they didn't make the top 12.
Those groups were profoundly moving to me for those reasons, because of that interest in the pai marere, that in those karakia that haven't been lost in Waikato. In light of our discussion about the C word, what I meant by reaching or giving us a glimpse at that āpōpōtanga, the future for Māoridom, I didn't mean a return to pre-Pākehā times in the way we dress or move or sound, but I meant the way that we saw the world, our world view. And at that time, we were very comfortable, of course, at appropriating those Pākehā things, but then introducing them into our world and making them our own. And of course, Motai Tangata Rau was such a great reflection of that tumultuous time of basically Pākehā numbers, Māori numbers were the same in the country. Something had to give. Tua Haumene, of course, as they saw that Māori couldn't beat the British in a physical sense with weapons. 18,000 troops had invaded Aotearoa were here, stationed here at one time. And Taranaki is full of memorials to that conflict. You see it in the land, you see it everywhere. And so Māoridom knew that we could not respond to colonisation in that sense. So we responded spiritually. And of course you had the rise of all of those magnificent prophets. And that's what Motai captured so well, is that they acknowledged not just tohu and te whiti, but also ti toka waru. You know, you had very different responses. Ko tēnei ringa, ko tū mātauinga, tēnei ringa, ko rongo. You know, so they responded and they acknowledged that so well. And of course, pura were wonderful for also referring to the pai Māori karakia. But again, as I say, not the karakia that were adopted in Waikato, which is a lot of whakapapa and so on. It was that immediate response, looking at the soldiers, seeing how bizarre their rituals were, and then believing if they spent so much time gathered round the flagpoles, dedicated to that ritual, that there must be some spiritual power in that flagpole. So they captured that spirit so well. You know, you had Paraone standing in the middle, and then you had the others around him at like the new ceremony, again acknowledging. And then I laughed because, you know, the reference to Te Haumene, which means, you know, the rain and wind band. And then, of course, he brings out the umbrella. So cheeky of him. I mean, it was so funny when he did that. I don't know how many people would have necessarily
got the
known
joke.
that reference. But yeah, that turbulent time where they were taking the words from Pākehā, piki mauna, pikiriwa, teihana, big mountain, big river, attention, and all those bizarre rituals that they captured, both Motai. And of course, Motai, you think of the wonderful new pole that stood at Kuranui, that Paraone is acknowledging. It stood in Ngati Whakaue territory, Ngati Motai territory. So he's acknowledging that and the immediate connection to Taranaki and the prophets.
What was your comment about people were upset about hearing pai Māori?
Rolling back the decades, when we were constructing the new museum in Hamilton, Te ariki nui te ātairangi kāhu, Hēnā re tūwhāngai, the tohunga, and others involved would not let the radio people or the TV people or the media anywhere near the performance, the iteration, the really intensely tapu procedures of their karakia. They were special, they were secret, they were private. There are a number of people, and not just elderly ones, in our community now who have carried that sensitivity, who have carried that need to protect and keep private. And so to have it on the competition stage, exposed in that way, broadcast live on media, not just throughout the country but throughout the world, was faintly disturbing. However, we do live in a time of instant gratification and, well, tera, yeah. So that's why I was pulling that face.
I'd like to go back and say something about the pai Māori, the uncomfortability of having something very precious and tapu be put onto a world stage, because, yeah, just listening to you explaining why many people found it worrying and unnerving and distressing, I can empathise a lot and understand in the sense that I actually feel the same way about my name and what it means, because everyone calls me Kura, but my first name is Kura Kakerangi after my great-grandmother, and often people will ask me on like interviews or even just like on the street, like, oh, what's your name mean? And there's never been a single time where I felt comfortable telling them what it means, and even on this podcast I wouldn't, because I know what it means within the context of my whānau and my whakapapa, but that doesn't mean that the whole world needs to know, because I think the worst thing that could possibly happen would be that I shared it on stage or to people that I didn't know, and then somebody, I don't know, names their child after me or distributes in a way that I can't control it.
Well, on that note, in terms of who gets to listen to and who gets to hear and see whakapapa, pai mārire rituals, 44 million people interacted with that content across social media particularly, as well as the broadcast. 44 million.
I think that social media is really interesting because Matatini serves so many functions, because there's the function within Ngai Māori of our sort of discussions between ourselves of where we're at and our cultural sort of dialogues. But then there's also the global and international scale of people all around the world wanting to understand more about Māori culture, especially when Māori, I feel, are seen as leaders within the Indigenous world because of how much we've been able to retain. Like, you have Americans. There was that one lady in America, I think, and she's asking, hey, can I ask the Maoris, is one of your hands stronger at worrying than the other one? And just stuff like that, which comes from genuine interest, genuine care and love for our people, because we've been able to put our culture to the world in that way.
Kura has raised some really interesting points. And Māori are world leaders, but we have defined our world because A, we've got a treaty, B, we've got one language, 3, we've got really well-defined geographic boundaries. We're who we are because of a number of factors over which we had no control, apart from the treaty. We had a lot of control over that, and look what's happened. We didn't expect 600,000 immigrants to turn up 50 years later, and over those 50 years demand somewhere to live, somewhere to farm, somewhere to own, which was ours. We didn't expect that. And I think with Matatini in Te Kahui Maunga, we saw the creative response to those issues in a way that's never happened before.
But the challenge to the treaty right now shows that we cannot take any of those things for granted. Totally. That's the reality. We think things are secure as a nation, and they're not. So, no, we can't take those things for granted. And in regards to 22, how many people?
Apparently 44 million interactions.
Well, that's incredible.
Globally.
I mean, it's incredible that there's so many people that pay interest, but it is slightly horrifying as well.
It's probably Te Arawa watching themselves over.
If only.
Yeah, and so some of our people that I've interviewed have talked a lot about the corporatisation in regards to how the groups are treated. Here's Kereama Wright again with his thoughts.
Definitely, Te Matatini, there'll be a few things for Te Matatini to review from this festival. I feel like maybe Te Matatini is focusing too much on the corporate element of Te Matatini and trying to turn it into this big money-making venture. But maybe through that pursuit of economic wealth, they might be forgetting about the people and what's actually important.
Since the mid-19th century, Māori people have performed in other countries. We have sent out all over the world, over the last 4 generations at least, groups of singers, haka men, really strong cultural exponents. It is part of who we are. And I suppose, too, I'm speaking as someone raised in a tourist family with tourist dancers. But their performative talent defined how the world sees Māori. And that is continuing. We were corporatised in the 19th century. When at Te Wairoa, before the mountain erupted, before Tarawera went up, people were paying to watch us dance. People were paying to watch us haka, to the extent that the carvings within one of our houses had gold sovereigns in the eyes. So the notion of people being alarmed at the way this is being corporatised is actually a very shallow one.
Tukua! Tukua.
I talked to Pere Wihongi, who spoke to me about their role as Kaitataki Tane and the lack of pronouns in Te Reo Māori.
I think the real problem is me and my connection to the word male leader. And what that looks like. Look, there have been plenty of feminine leaders, don't get me wrong, they've been going for years. But whether or not those feminine leaders identify themselves as male or gender fluid, that's, I suppose, the difference. Where I'm not exclusively male, yet when it comes to these titles and standing in those roles, I have to be exclusively male. So it does feel like conforming in some instances. But and the other side to that is, of course, I'm not going to. I would love to go for Kaitataki Wahine, the female leader, but just imagine the uproar that would cause. So, it's like, pick your battles, choose your battles. One. Two, it's not even the point of that title, it's more so the point of standing in that role that I actually don't affiliate, that I actually don't naturally affiliate myself to, and I just have to. Small ways in which we're changing that narrative is that you don't actually need the Tane. When they say manukura Tane, manukura wahine, you can just say ko ngā manukura, the leaders. It doesn't have to be the male leader and the female leader. There's different ways where we can go about looking at gender. If that's the biggest problem and the biggest issue, it doesn't need to be as specific and straightforward as the Western ideology of male, female. And so I think that's what I challenge this year. I don't say this explicitly and tell everyone this. This is my own interpretation of the situation, and that I am gender fluid. When people do look at me, they don't go, "Oh, he tane tera." I've got nieces and nephews. Some call me uncle, some call me auntie. If people were to genuinely look at me, they wouldn't go, "Sir." They wouldn't necessarily go. They would. I do challenge the heteronormative view on what I should be according to society. So that's where I feel the uncomfortability is, without removing or disregarding all the other amazing leaders, feminine male leaders, and leaders that have been in Te Matatini past. I don't know if there have been any in my stance in particular. Whether or not Te Matatini will take that on board, I don't know. I don't actually really care, to be honest, because on our stance from Angitu, it wasn't actually about the title of Manukura Tane. It was actually about the position of leading the team on the stage. So when I'm on the stage, when I am leading, I'm not sitting there singing, "I am the Kaitataki Tane." I'm just leading. However you interpret that is up to you.
I think Pere is awesome. I think it's quite disappointing for me in a way to hear Pere have to say, "I'd love to go for Kaitataki Wahine," but imagine what the uproar would be. Because I think the part that I find disappointing about it is that I know that it's true. And it's quite complex because, like, I'm a wahine. I'm cis. I was born a woman. I remain a woman. And I will probably never be anything but a woman. And so I don't have any, I will never have to consider any of these things that Pere needs to, or that any of our takatapui performers will have to. And so this is the ongoing conversation and us continuing to be in the realm of tūmataunga and this debate of, will you let me be who I am? Or is your understanding of what our culture is more important? And it's a massive question that I have no answer to.
One of the intriguing things is, if we turn to our tupuna hakipia or tawiri, Shakespeare, how all of the performers, all of the female roles were played by men. So yeah, just throwing that in the mix. How does it matter? We're not talking about roles on the marae. That's a whole different issue, maybe. But when it comes to performance, haka, yeah, how important are these things?
First of all, I want to say that Māori is not a gendered language. It's not. We don't have a word for him or for her or for she, or for he. So that is, again, the C word coming into play and the intrusion of a way of judging and of seeing other humans. But in the world from which we originate, although there was te ira Tane, te ira wahine, there was an ocean of fluidity. There was no absolute heterosexual and absolute homosexual in the world of our ancestors. Look at the mōteatea, and if you're lucky enough, look at the whakairo, which I have. It's a really hard question for me as an old dyke of the last 70 plus years to not become really emotional about, because I congratulate Pere on his courage, on their courage, on their courage, on their absolute in-your-face rage and theatricality and brilliance.
And the other criticism was of the judging.
But it is very complicated, and actually I still don't fully understand it. Because the judging also, the judging criteria is quite broad, and it's left up to the interpretation of each judge. You know, so for example, we got a mark taken off by one judge for not performing the wiri properly, and that was one mark. And then another judge took 2 marks off for the same thing. You know, so I think a review of the whole Te Matatini structure, the judging, the venue, all of that, I think is definitely required.
So that was Kereama Wright, who after 8 Te Matatini events still doesn't really understand the judging. Given that that Ngati Whakaue won, how do you feel about the judging?
Oh,
She'd like to say they did a perfect job.
there are elements of the process which I question. I think one of the more bizarre being, for example, the 2 elements in the non-aggregates. Tiho Waiata, 13 first places, 13 groups came first. Kairangi, Reo Atuhi, composition, 13 groups came first. How the hell do you get 13 groups coming first when actually you want a champion? So there's a question there.
Am I able to jump in on that?
Yes.
Because we were at the prize giving, when they were announcing those 13 first place winners, the audience was audibly going like, okay, like you could hear everyone. And even the prizes where there was like 3 first place, the audience was not happy about that. And to be honest, nobody was, because it's a competition. And even though, you know, we talk about it's about the revival of our culture and putting Māori to the stage, it is also about who's going to win, because we want a winner. And when there's 13 groups being proclaimed first place, it kind of feels like nobody won.
So given that Ngati Whakaue were the winners, how do you feel about that judging, Ngahuia?
The performance of Whakaue was old school, was classic 1920s, 30s, 40s Ngati Whakaue stance. Even observing the archival footage of our great-grandmothers, our grandmothers, our great-uncles, our kraua performing, that is what you saw at Matatini this year. And it was very much a reflection on and an honouring of our uncle, of the koro, of Uncle Bom, and of his time. And so we recaptured that. We brought that back. And I think that the gimmickry and the theatricality and more performative extravagance of other groups looked modern and brilliant and extremely diverting. But next to the classic, living in a changing time as we are now, the classic had more appeal. Just saying.
Classic, but what I loved about the haka, for example, Hoari Karona, is it was a homage to Bum, but it was also acknowledging the many statements that he made that often would be controversial about the government and the lack of support that Hokowhitu received when they returned back to Aotearoa. So he received a knighthood and was such a great example of a human being, but he was not beyond criticising the government, and that was reflected in the haka and the performance of Ngati Whakaue.
Thank you. I'd like to say too, just saying, when Gaza was invaded on October 7th, we had a demonstration in Rotorua, and Uncle led it. He led it. And he said that day, no more. My cousins, my uncles, my mates are lying overseas for what? We came back to what? And it's that type of really intense and well-informed and visceral anti-colonial sentiment and questioning and confrontation that old man could present, that he could express. And we honoured that in our presentation. It's his legacy to us and to all of us.
That was Tukua, our arts and cultural podcast featuring Ngahuia Te Awekotuku, Brett Graham and Kura Turuwhenua at Te Matatini 2025.
Tukua.